So when using HTMX, we can use hxOn to listen to events and execute our own JavaScript code. And here I wrote that code inline because, as mentioned, that's indeed recommended, but we could also put this into a separate file, into a function, and then we could just call that function here. That would work as well. But that's not the only thing we can change here. Instead, when using hxOn, or in general, when it comes to listening to events, we're not limited to built-in standard events like that submit event here. Instead, HTMX actually has a long list of custom events, which you can find in the official documentation, that are emitted by HTMX when certain things occur or happen. For example, HTMX emits the before request event whenever it's about to send an AJAX request. So a get or a post or a delete or some other request. It also emits an after request event whenever such a request is done. And you can listen to all these events to then run your own code upon the occurrence of one of those events. So for example, here we could also clear that form not when it's submitted, but maybe after the request is done. So once we know that it succeeded. And we can achieve this by adding the after request event here. So by listening to that event. And that's now not a standard built-in event in the browser, but instead one of those custom events emitted by HTMX. Now what's important here about that event name is that it must not use this camel case notation, which you do find in the docs. There it's after request written like this. But since HTML attributes are case insensitive, this won't work, and instead you should use this kebab case, this dash separated notation here when listening to those HTMX events. Now if you want to listen to HTMX events like after request, you also have to add HTMX : here as an extra element in that overall attribute name. Because these HTMX events are actually not just named after request and so on, but instead HTMX : after request. And this HTMX : part is part of the event name. So therefore, the overall event to which we want to listen here is HTMX : after dash request, because after request written like this would not work. But with that, we now have the code we need to clear this form whenever the after request event is emitted by HTMX for this form, which will happen whenever this post request here is done. With that, if you go back and reload, you'll see that if you add a new goal, this input is still cleared and it looks almost like before, or it's almost as quick as before, because I'm all running this locally, so sending that request is super fast. But actually, the input is only cleared after the goal was sent and the response was received. Now, listening to HTMX events like this is possible, but we can actually write less code here. Because, for example, whenever you're using hxOn to listen to HTMX events, you can omit this HTMX : part, which is part of all those HTMX event names, and you can instead write a double colon here. This is simply a shortcut, a shorter notation that's understood by HTMX that tells HTMX that the event name thereafter is an HTMX event and should be preceded with HTMX : It simply allows you to omit that though when using this double colon notation. One other thing that could be improved here is how we select the form. Sure, we can select it like this, but we can also instead use the special this keyword here, and HTMX will make sure that this will refer to this form. And therefore now we have a way more concise way of writing this code, and will of course still achieve the same result as before. So with that, if we save that, if I learn HTMX, you see the input still is cleared after every goal, But now we achieve this with less code.